Hello everyone, welcome to my Nature Diaries. I want to talk to you today about drawing realistically, and I want to share at first some thoughts that I have about it, and then some tips to get you started and over the intimidation of starting to draw realistically in your sketchbook or nature journal. Be realistic about painting realistically. I think it's important to be in the right headspace before we start to learn anything new, whether it's art or any kind of new skill. When it comes to painting and drawing realistically, what happens is we often compare ourselves to people online or even to somebody that might be hanging in a museum. Most of us are not going to be painting like Rembrandt or Da Vinci. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't make art. Even those artists had to start somewhere. They didn't start out by drawing hyper-realistic when they first took paper to pencil or paintbrush to canvas. But the goal of this video isn't so much about trying to paint hyper-realistic or photorealistic or even a botanical style of painting similar to this. It's important for us to realize that any kind of hyper-realism or very realistic painting usually requires time, patience, and a lot of fine details. When we see an Instagram post or even a YouTube video like this, we look and think, oh, it's so easy for them. They can make this so quickly and it's not hard work at all. In most cases, even very experienced artists take quite a while, or it takes time for them to make something look pretty real. It just depends, of course, on the scale of the art or the painting, but it's not usually a very fast process. And if they are making art fast, it is because they have been doing it for quite a while and they have honed their skills. As much as I love to draw and paint realistically and will continue to do so, a lot of my nature journaling work is done in a different type of style. By simplifying realism, we can still make something very beautiful. We can nature journal with it. We can represent realistically what that item is, but we don't have to worry about it being so botanically perfect. And this leads me to my first tip, which is to start with a simple illustrative style. What I mean by this is basically taking the object that we are drawing and just make it as simple as possible. It's really just a process of eliminating anything that feels overwhelming as far as details and just coming up with the very most simplistic shapes that we see. I do have this video that you're seeing a clip of where I talk a little bit more about that, and I will have that linked up in the corner and in the description. It's also really important to choose subjects that are very simplistic and something that you can see yourself recreating easily. Case in point, I'm going to show some demos with these little acorns. Why I chose such a small little acorn on the left, I don't know why, but it's so cute. To start with our basic illustration, we're just going to look and focus on these shapes. Now the shapes will change all the time. It just depends on how you're holding the object or how it's laying down on the table. This of course has to do with the perspective of how we're seeing it, and you can vary up the perspective of the same object and practice drawing it many, many times. For this drawing, you can see I kind of have just a stretched out oval, and then I'm going to come in on both sides to create the curves for the main body of the nut. And this little acorn has such a fun little stem at the top, which does help contribute to the realistic look of it. And I'm just going to add a little L shape up at the top here. Notice that I'm drawing lightly and I'm using multiple lines. I'm kind of going back and forth. I don't have a problem. I don't have to erase constantly. I'm just trying to get the gist of the shape in. Instead of drawing in all the little patterns in the cap of the acorn, I'm just going to pencil in a few little lines just to designate or show that there's texture. I can use my paint to further enhance this, but the idea is to just keep it as simple as possible. My next tip is important for realism, which is proportion is key. When I go to nature journal these acorns, I need to make sure that I have these proportions of each acorn as accurate as possible. Noticing that the nut portion of this acorn is much longer and even skinnier, I'm just making sure I get as close as possible to the actual shape of the nut. This is more about practice than perfection, and we are going to get better as long as we just keep our focus on the main objective. In this case, we're focusing on those proportions. I decided for these two drawings, I wanted to show them to you in real time so you can see how quickly it really does take to draw something as simple as this. There's no reason to spend a long time when we are illustrating. Here's a bonus tip is, once again, use a very simplified palette, and I'm also using a larger brush just to get started with these. If you don't already have a favorite travel palette or watercolor palette, then I highly suggest this one. I have the information linked in the description. What I love about it is that it has all these pre-made landscape, nature type colors, and it works perfectly with most of the art that I do make. I did add the Payne's Gray though to this palette, which I didn't end up using, but just so you know, you would need to purchase the Payne's Gray separately. To get started, I'm just going in with some light colors. One of the things that I do like to do is add a few layers of colors, even for a simple illustration. This is optional. You could just go in with really 2 colors if you want to keep this illustration very basic, but to unify the whole painting, I do like to kind of do an undercoat of, in this case, yellow ochre. The main point of an illustration, in my mind at least, is that we want to keep it as simple as possible. While I will be adding a few layers to this because the watercolor paint is starting out so light, I don't want to go too crazy about it, and I'm okay with it looking flat and not looking 3D. We can still represent accurately and realistically something that we have found in nature, even just using this type of painting. If you are a beginner with watercolors, then the one mistake, I guess you would call it, I see happen sometimes is that there's just too much paint put down to begin with. Limiting the amount of paint that we put down initially can really help give us a place to go with the painting as opposed to being kind of one and done. You may remember when you were a child and you colored in something with crayons, you didn't just put down a dark color to begin with. You usually just added one color and then maybe you would darken it later on. This is the same approach I like to use when working with watercolors, because if we put too much paint down to begin with, we really don't have a lot of options left in our painting. I am now adding a little bit more details, and I'm just adding a little bit more color, darkening a few areas, just because I know that watercolor does dry light. However, if you were outside plein air, or maybe you were nature journaling something, then you could stop anywhere and always tweak it when you got home. My goal here is to make this as realistic and represent that acorn as simply as I can. I don't want to, again, add a whole lot of details or spend a lot of time. To further make this look like an illustration, I'm going to take my fountain pen, and the link for this is in the description, and I'm going to just go ahead and add some quick lines. You don't need a fancy pen for this. You could use a gel pen, you could use a ballpoint pen. Just remember that if you want to watercolor over it, then a gel pen would not be your best friend in this case. Also, a micron pen would be another great option for something like this, and you could also paint over the lines later if you wanted to draw your item first. Even though using ink is optional, it does add a really fun stylized look to the painting itself. I swapped pens here because I thought it would be fun to just try some colored ink. In this one, in this pen, this is brown permanent ink. If you want your sketch to look a little bit more natural and less stylized, then you could try doing something like this. Again, the nice thing about these types of drawings, these simple illustrations, are the fact that it's going to get you started doing something. Even if you felt like your art could not get past this stage, you're still going to develop a really good style, and you're going to be able to make art that is something that you should be proud of. A lot of modern art really looks like this anyway, so you're right on track if this is the style that you are painting right now. Here's another tip to help you improve quickly, and that's tip number 3, that paper makes a difference. I was showing you earlier that is Arteza 100% cotton paper. What I noticed the most while I was working on this cotton paper is that it made such a difference for me when I went to paint it. I know you've heard of Arch's cotton paper and other brands, and wonder maybe, do they make a difference? Well, I feel like for a very basic style, illustrative style like we just did, it made a huge difference, at least for me. What makes this paper so great, especially for beginners and experts, of course, is the fact that it just has so much texture and character in itself. It interacts with the paint beautifully and takes on water in such a different way. In other words, instead of you having to work really hard to create texture, the paper kind of can do that for you. The biggest con with this paper, as most of you probably know, is that it does tend to be pretty expensive. If the price of the paper is holding you back, then one of the options that you can do is to cut out small squares or something that would fit into your nature journal or sketchbook and just put some of your art that's on the really good paper into your cheaper sketchbook. Because these 100% cotton watercolor sketchbooks, if you can find them, are so expensive, this is really a fun way, especially as a beginner or even somebody that's advanced, to be able to use this paper and get the quality out of it and still be able to have a sketchbook. Again, one of the things I noticed right away was just how easily the paper was just doing the work for me. It was just spreading the water, of course, really nicely and just creating texture without me having to do too much. Another thing to remember with cotton watercolor paper is the fact that you really do need to give it time to dry, especially if you do add a lot of water into your painting. This could feel a little frustrating if you are a bit of an impatient painter, kind of maybe like I am, but of course, if I am making any artwork for sale or giving it to anyone, I always use this paper because it is wonderful to paint on. I would really love to hear your thoughts about this. Are you using a cellulose-based paper? Are you using a combination? Do you use 100% cotton? And what are your thoughts? Do you think it helps you to be a better painter? The paper that I have the most of in cotton is Arches 100% watercolor paper, and this is something I usually get on sale or ask for it as gifts. Just putting a comparison, look at the difference. It's really huge here. The paper that I used for these first two acorns were on Canson XL watercolor paper, but it is a cellulose paper. And while I still don't get the same results as I did on the 100% cotton paper, I don't hate how it turned out. You know why? That's because I really love and embrace all these different art styles of illustration. I have watercolored on just notebook paper before, and it doesn't bother me. I think it's just the idea of having fun, coloring, and just getting out there and getting started making art. Just for consistency's sake, I'm going to go ahead and add in some inky lines like I did before with the same fountain pens. Also reminding myself that less is more with these lines, just starting out with a few sketchy type of lines and adding a little bit of lines for texture if I feel like it's something that I need. The biggest thing I want to emphasize with these few drawings here are the fact that you can just create these flat or 2D images and they can still look real. It's also a great place to start with your art, and it's the exact way that I started drawing. I was able to draw images that had this flat look, and I knew that they weren't exactly realistic, but I enjoyed drawing them anyway. As long as we can get started with this, it's not too far off for us to be able to continue on and create images that have much more depth and do feel a little bit more 3D. I'd also love to hear from you if you add ink or colored pencils or any other media to your watercolors and what you use and why you like it. Now I want to just go on and show you a quick, fast example. I'm just, as you can see, speeding these up, but I wanted to show you about how you can take it up a little bit, like take it up a notch and make it feel a little bit more real. All I'm doing for that is adding values for realism. Once we get down those 2D images and those simple illustrations, we can start now going back in and adding more color where we feel like there would be shadows. This is really a great way to learn how to observe and also to play with colors as well. Learning to paint realistically, I think, is a process, and processes are okay. Yes, some people can learn how to do these things much faster than others, but the main thing is to not count yourself out. If you feel like you have been in that beginner stage of drawing for years and years, don't feel badly, because that's where I was for decades. That's right, I drew very simply for many, many, many years. It really wasn't until YouTube and art tutorials that I was able to learn, and my progress sped up big time. Now, don't get discouraged if you still haven't been able to progress like you want, even with YouTube, because it does take time. And that's not a bad thing. The main thing, again, is to just keep practicing. My fifth tip is to try using mixed media. If you're done with your watercolor and it still doesn't feel like you have captured the image the way you want to, just try using other forms of media with your watercolor. I'm using graphite pencil just to enhance this image, but you could use colored pencils, gel pens, and watercolor pencils as well. Thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't already and if you are inspired. Also, like, comment, I'd love to hear from you, appreciate your thoughts, and share the video. That is a great way to help out my channel. And if you're over on Instagram, you can follow me at my_nature diaries. Hope you were inspired, and remember, you are so amazing and creative. Bye.